From Lighthouse Reports, this is Backlight. Every month, we take you behind the scenes of real-world collaborative investigations.
We're your hosts, Impact Editor Tessa Pang
and investigative reporter Beatriz Ramalho da Silva. Happy New Year to our listeners. We are back, and this year we have a really exciting lineup of episodes and guests talking about all things investigative journalism.
We are kicking off with an episode on a topic that's been in everyone's feeds this year, and that's AI. So unfortunately, we will not be talking about the latest ChatGPT installment or how you can now produce your own podcasts using AI, which, by the way, I did over the break, and they're scarily human-like and very engaging. This episode will actually explore AI accountability reporting, which is essentially how journalists can investigate how AI is shaping the world around us, its effects on local communities, and push for accountability for the companies and governments responsible for its use.
So there's been this misconception that to take on this reporting, you need to be a data reporter or you need to have a specific set of skills or expertise, but that's not really the case. AI accountability reporting is not only its own beat, but it's really something reporters should be learning to apply in whatever it is that they are covering. This is so important because AI's impacts are so far-reaching, from how it's used to guide social welfare decisions to hiring outcomes to its impact on the climate.
We're going to be joined by two reporters with far more expertise than ourselves, who'll tell you exactly what this kind of reporting entails and how to get started.
So we will be chatting with Karen Hao, who is an award-winning journalist writing about the impact of artificial intelligence on society. She is currently working on a book about the AI industry and is a regular contributor to The Atlantic. She was previously a senior editor at MIT Technology Review, and her work has been cited several times in US Congress.
My name is Karen Hao, and I am an AI reporter. I've been covering artificial intelligence since 2018, and I primarily focus on AI accountability, the intersection of AI and society. So I look at the way that this technology is developed, who it's developed by, the values that are sort of entrenched within it because of the people that develop it, and how that then has ripple effects around the world, particularly in communities in the Global South and other communities that are essentially far away and very different from Silicon Valley.
And we'll be speaking to our Lighthouse colleague, Gabriel Geiger.
My name is Gabriel Geiger, and I'm an investigative journalist at Lighthouse Reports, where I focus on AI accountability investigations.
Gabriel led our Suspicion Machine series. It's basically a set of Europe-wide stories uncovering biased AI that's deployed in European social welfare systems. And this work has already had significant impact in the Netherlands, France, Spain, and Sweden. Links to the profiles of both our guests and their reporting can be found in the show notes. Okay, let's get into it.
There's been a lot of discussion about reporting with AI. How do we use AI within our reporting to help us do certain things? And what are the limits of it? And there's a lot of discussion about how AI might transform newsrooms. That's not what AI accountability reporting is. AI accountability reporting is reporting on AI, not reporting with AI. So how do we as journalists investigate the deployment of artificial intelligence systems?
And it's sort of important to think about that in the broad sense. How do we investigate the different types of data that are collected to train AI systems? How do we investigate the climate impacts of large language models like ChatGPT? How do we investigate bias and automation that's sort of embedded in AI models? And then lastly, how do we, the sort of broader question, how do we investigate the deployment of AI in the real world? What are the consequences for people or communities when you actually choose to deploy an AI system? And I think it's important to say that a bit like climate change, I think everybody has space to do a bit of AI reporting because AI is increasingly becoming embedded within our institutions. So I would encourage reporters who maybe, let's say, are working in healthcare to think about different processes that might start to get automated and to sort of follow those leads and try to, ask questions about, is this process being automated? Is AI being used here? And to sort of use their own expertise to pursue that story. And if things do get more technical and they need assistance, to either rely on collaborate with other reporters or with academics who may be able to help them through some of the more thorny technical concepts.
Yeah, I like how Gabriel clarified this distinction. So AI accountability reporting isn't reporting with AI, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be its own separate topic. It's really something that people can incorporate into their own work, regardless of what they're covering. So long story short, don't leave AI reporting just to the experts.
Exactly. And it's totally normal for a reporter covering something like healthcare or climate to not fully grasp technical concepts related to algorithms or to artificial intelligence. And that's why this tip that Gabriel gives about collaborating with academics is really helpful. And it's something we often do at Lighthouse with our own investigations.
So when we spoke to Karen last week, I was super curious about how she got into this kind of work.
It's not a very sexy story. I was just looking for a job and I went into journalism rather by accident. I studied engineering in college and I was working in tech in San Francisco. And then within the first year of working at a startup, I kind of very quickly realized that the incentives for technology production in Silicon Valley were sort of being driven towards technologies that don't necessarily align with the public interest. And I was both very disheartened by that and also trying to figure out how to actually correct for that. Like, was there other levers that I could pull either within or outside the tech industry that could try to change the incentive structures? And that sort of then led me to journalism, which sort of then led me to start covering tech in journalism. And my first full-time job was as an AI reporter. And I had applied to like dozens of different jobs, and it was the only one that gave me an offer. And I remember at the time, I had a very serious conversation with my mom where I was like, I don't even like AI is so uninteresting. I don't even know why I would take this job or like what I would write about. I think I would get bored really fast. And she was like, just try it. And if you absolutely hate it after a while, then of course try something else, but don't write it off until you've like given it a genuine try. And I realized after I started writing about AI that it was actually the perfect way to explore kind of all of the issues that I was interested in with tech and society and all the things that I had seen when I was working in San Francisco, because AI is in everything and everything touches AI. So it was kind of just a microcosm of all of the issues that I had seen. And then it became like incredibly fun for me. So I've been reporting on AI ever since.
Karen had some practical tips about how to start incorporating AI accountability reporting into your own coverage.
Well, one of the first places that they could start is I've been working on this series called the AI Spotlight series with the Pulitzer Center with Gabriel Geiger at Lighthouse Reports. And we developed a curriculum that's completely free and online that people can come attend sessions with us to learn about sort of the fundamentals of AI reporting. But that aside, I think, first of all, I do want to dispel the notion that AI reporting is like only tech reporting or only meant for people with some kind of technical background. I think that's absolutely not true. There are so many AI stories right now that just intersect every possible beat. Like if you're covering healthcare, if you're covering the environment, if you're covering politics, AI has impacted your world. And you don't need to know anything about the technicalities of how a deep learning model works to know that there are absolutely ginormous data centers now popping up in different places, and that's going to have ripple effects on the environment. And you don't need to know anything about the technicalities to also know that deep fakes are exacerbating the misinformation issue. And that could have ripple effects both on women in terms of gender-based violence and also on politicians, particularly the intersection of female politicians. So I think really to get started with AI reporting, the first is to maybe start exploring, based on the current topic that you're covering right now, how is AI intersecting that topic? And start talking with experts that are at that intersection. Explore like what kinds of impacts are they starting to see? What kinds of stories do they think are being undercovered? And from there, start building out kind of a knowledge base of the impacts that are happening. Start talking with people that just like live in communities that are seeing phenomenon that they don't fully understand that might be tied to AI impacting them. One of the resources that I often rely on myself when I'm trying to understand sort of the more technical details on things is actually YouTube videos. Like there are huge amounts of wonderful resources that kind of break down how AI works, what are like the hottest papers to read. You don't necessarily have to dive into all of that. That's only if you are interested in digging into that part. And really a lot of AI reporting is actually just typical reporting, like whatever you do to cover the environment or cover healthcare or talk to teachers within schools, like that, those are the same tools that you're using to cover the impact of AI everywhere.
Gabriel also gave some ideas on how reporters can find leads and get started on AI accountability work and add it into the field that they are already covering.
It's more about familiarizing yourself with sort of the main concepts around AI. So what do we mean by when we say training data? Or what do we mean when we say an AI system is biased? If you sort of understand the different issues that can arise when you both develop an AI model and then deploy it in the real world, that's the only starting point that you really need. So I would say, don't be intimidated by the fact that, this is a sort of technical artifact, an AI model. You don't need to be a coder in order to do these investigations. Secondly, I would really try to think about things in this sort of framework around how AI systems are built. So you can investigate the data that an AI system is built on. Where's that data coming from? What are the sort of privacy concerns? Who is potentially labeling that data? So oftentimes, training data for AI models is labeled by low-income workers in the global south, for example, or investigating the sort of climate impacts of AI or investigating bias. So how does ChatGPT operate in different languages, or how does it sort of produce images of different types of people in the world? So I think really having a clear understanding of the different archetypes of stories that you can tell across the sort of AI supply chain, if you will, is a really important starting point.
I think one of the main takeaways here is don't be intimidated if you don't have a technical skill or if you've never done any technology reporting before. Increasingly, like Karen and Gabriel mentioned, AI is becoming embedded everywhere. And this concept of the AI supply chain that Gabriel mentioned is a good way to have a clearer understanding of what reporting opportunities there are inside whatever beat you're covering.
You're listening to Backlight, Lighthouse Report's monthly deep dive into the world of investigative journalism. If you want to know more about our investigations, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. Or if you have a suggestion on who we can talk to on this podcast, you can reach out to us at backlight@lighthousereports.com.
We're back. This month, we are talking about AI accountability reporting with Karen Hao and Gabriel Geiger. Artificial intelligence systems are used worldwide by governments and companies to inform decisions across all areas of our lives, from policing to medicine and social welfare. There's a lot of coverage about what AI is and what it can and can't do. However, much more work remains to be done in terms of interrogating this technology and holding the governments and corporations using these systems accountable. One of the things we asked both of our guests is what do they think this type of reporting is missing? Looking ahead, what they'd like to read more about.
Definitely data centers. I've already mentioned this multiple times, but one of the things that I think is absolutely absurd is the sheer amount of physical infrastructure that is being built right now for developing these large-scale generative AI models. And physical infrastructure doesn't go away. So once it's built, it's much harder to move away from the kind of extractivist dimensions of AI development today, because companies are investing hundreds of billions into building these data centers, and they're going to then continue running those data centers to try to recoup the cost, continue selling to different industries. I think another dimension, very interrelated, that I think needs to be looked into more is where are companies, which industries are companies pitching AI models to recoup these costs? So I did a story with The Atlantic a few months ago that was a year-long investigation into how Microsoft has been specifically turning to the oil and gas industry to recoup those costs. And if you think about it, if you're spending hundreds of billions into a technology, there are actually only a few places, a few industries, or a few government agencies that have that much money to throw around at a largely unproven, unreliable technology. There's oil and gas, there's big pharma, there's the military industrial complex, surveillance. And so I think that is also a story that is sort of really being undertold right now, that it's not going to be an accident at all that we are going to see kind of the fueling of a lot more of these industries that, AI companies pretend they're trying to build systems to ameliorate or improve. And I think that maybe the last one is kind of going back to the data center idea. Like, there's this huge issue right now where the world is running out of energy to power these things. And because of that, it is really starting to reverse the energy transition. And I don't think we've seen yet that enough stories that really connect this global phenomenon to the hyper-local, but there are so many hyper-local stories in which communities are going to be deeply impacted by this kind of physical infrastructure built out.
I think that's super interesting because AI is often seen as a solution to the climate crisis. But in reality, as Karen mentions, it actually exacerbates a lot of the problems.
Yeah, and Gabriel had some creative suggestions on this too. He talked about how playing around with tools like ChatGPT can actually be a starting point for an investigation.
In the reporting that I've done, which is oftentimes about government algorithms or companies that build algorithms for governments, there was always this difficulty of how do I get any sort of technical access to play around with this AI system myself. But now with ChatGPT, I mean, the thing about it is, okay, the way it works is kind of a black box. Like, you can't just obtain the algorithm, the model, quote unquote, or the training data. But on the flip side, anybody can start interacting with ChatGPT and mess around with it. And so some of the most interesting investigations I've seen into ChatGPT, for example, look at, do something like, okay, what happens if you feed ChatGPT the same resume or CV, 100 different copies of the same resume or CV, but just change the name to different racially distinct names. And you ask them, the ChatGPT, to rank those CVs in terms of who should get the job. Bloomberg, who did this exact investigation, found is that it would systematically rank people with racially distinct names lower than people with, in the US context, non-racially distinct names. And this is despite the same, being sent the same exact CVs, same exact qualifications. And I think that type of methodology, there's so much opportunity there, especially to sort of think about this in different language and cultural contexts.
One point which Gabriel made is that this reporting can take different forms, especially in different parts of the world. So he shared an example from his work on the suspicion machines investigation, where he was able to obtain the code for a welfare algorithm after filing hundreds of Freedom of Information requests. He mentioned how this kind of work actually wouldn't be feasible in countries with stricter Freedom of Information laws.
One of the things that's really important, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, is really thinking about a framework of the different types of AI stories you can tell. And the reason why we keep going back to that is that in certain contexts, the type of work that we did in Rotterdam, for example, is much more difficult. In the global south, in Africa, for example, many African countries, freedom of information laws are a lot weaker than they are in Europe. So expecting to get comprehensive technical materials like programming code or training data to run audits is a lot more difficult. But at the same time, you also have a whole series of other really important issues related to AI operating in those contexts. So, for example, data labelers in Kenya who have to label traumatic content to sort of feed Meta/Facebook's content moderation AI. So there's more issues there around labor exploitation. The idea of this is to sort of boil down what the basic skills and sort of concepts and things that you need to understand to take on this reporting is. And this framework is like the sort of leitmotif that we kept going back to. Like, what are the different types of stories that you can tell? And in different contexts, those different types of stories might be more or less difficult.
The point of AI accountability reporting really is to go beyond the hype surrounding these technologies and to hold both the systems and the individuals behind them accountable. Like Karen mentioned, the impact of this technology can be hyperlocal, and she gave examples of the implementation of massive data centers that can disrupt the livelihoods of local communities in the global south. And as Gabriel pointed out, the collateral effects can be incredibly dangerous, like when ChatGPT, often used by recruiters, was found to be racially biased in ranking resumes. And this is what Karen had to say about the possibility for impact in AI accountability reporting and what it can contribute to the public debate.
I think one of the things that is sort of conflated in public discourse right now is what AI actually is, because AI as one word refers to like 100 different things. I think a lot of the companies who benefit from selling AI tools, like they really use a lot of wordplay to kind of conceal and obfuscate what forms of AI they're actually referring to when they refer to like which ones are beneficial versus which ones have harms. And so I don't want the public to take away that like all AI technologies are horrible and should never be used. There are many AI technologies that I think are very beneficial. There are indeed AI tools that are computer vision based that are then used to help doctors and radiologists identify cancer at earlier stages. Like that is an actual AI technology that exists. But these tools are fundamentally different from like ChatGPT, from Claude, from these other generative AI systems, which have largely been the ones that I'm talking about, where with like massive amounts of data being used, massive infrastructure build-outs. And you might receive a lot of utility from using those tools and simplifying your life. And I think really what I hope the public discourse can start to evolve towards is understanding better each AI tool, its supply chain and the trade-offs. Like if you're using a massively energy intensive technology to do kind of like a small thing that's going to give you a tiny bit of benefit, I would kind of ask, like, do you really need to use that?
That's all for now. Thank you for listening. To keep updated with our investigations, you can follow us on our social media. Our Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Blue Sky accounts are @LHReports, and you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, lighthousereports.com. All of these accounts are linked in the show notes.
Thanks to our friends at Spuvio for the sound editing, mixing, and design. And one final thing, if you're enjoying this podcast, feel free to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really helps others to find the podcast too. And if you have any feedback or ideas on who we should be talking to, you can always reach out to us by email at backlight@lighthousereports.com. Thank you so much and see you next month.